I walked into the living room with Mark, a man I had been secretly seeing for a few months. John, my husband, was sitting on the couch, absorbed in a TV show. His face lit up with a smile when he saw me, but it quickly faded when he noticed Mark standing beside me. "John, we need to talk," I said, my voice trembling slightly. John turned off the TV and looked at me, confusion spreading across his face. "This is Mark," I continued, pointing to him. "He wants you to share me with him, and we can't say no." John's face drained of color. He didn't respond, just stood up abruptly and walked out of the room without saying a word. The sound of the toilet flushing echoed in the silence that followed, leaving Mark and me standing there, unsure what would happen next. Mark shrugged, his demeanor calm, betraying no concern. We stood there awkwardly, the minutes stretching on, each one thickening the tension in the air. I nervously glanced at the closed door, waiting for John to return. What would he say? How would he react? I couldn't imagine the storm that was brewing inside him. After what seemed like an eternity, I heard footsteps approaching. John walked back into the room, his expression unreadable. He was holding something, a small silver keychain that caught the light as it swung from his fingers. "What's that?" I asked hesitantly, my voice barely above a whisper. John remained calm, his gaze steady. "This," he said calmly, "is the key to a new beginning." His words hung in the air, heavy with meaning I couldn't quite grasp. Mark shifted uneasily beside me, sensing the gravity of the moment. John continued, his voice calm but tinged with quiet anger. "You bring another man into our home, into our marriage, and you expect me to accept it?" I swallowed hard, feeling a knot of guilt and fear in my chest. "John, He cut me off sharply, his tone cold. "You have made your choice," he interrupted. "Now you both have to face the consequences." He turned and walked away, leaving Mark and I stunned and unsure of what would happen next. A few minutes later, John returned with a small box in his hand, the box in which we kept our wedding rings. My heart sank as I saw it. He opened it slowly, revealing the empty inside. "I flushed our wedding rings down the toilet," he said, his voice calm but filled with restrained emotion. "I guess we won't be needing them anymore." Shock and disbelief washed over me. The weight of his actions hit me like a blow. I exchanged glances with Mark, who stood awkwardly, unsure of how to react. John carefully placed the empty box on the table and returned to the couch. His posture relaxed, but his eyes burning with a new intensity I had never seen before. The room fell silent, broken only by the distant hum of appliances and the ticking of a clock. I struggled for words to make sense of the turmoil inside me. "John, why?" I asked, my voice shaking. John's voice cut through the silence, sharp and full of pain. "Because you brought another man into our marriage, into our home, and expected everything to stay the same." His words hit me like a painful reminder of the choices I had made and their consequences. Guilt gnawed at me, mixed with a growing fear of what would come next. Mark shifted uncomfortably, breaking the tense silence. "John, maybe we should—" John interrupted firmly, his eyes fixed on me. "There is no we anymore." His words sank deep into my chest. The reality of what he had said, the symbolic act of washing away our wedding rings, left me reeling. Tears welling up in my eyes, a mixture of remorse and helplessness threatening to overwhelm me. John's expression softened slightly as he looked at me, a flicker of pain crossing his face before he regained his composure. "It has to be this way," he said quietly, more to himself than to us. Mark remained silent, his presence a constant reminder of the rift I had caused. I wanted to reach out and undo the damage, but John's calm determination and the empty ring box were stark reminders of the irreparable breach between us. Hours passed in a strange silence, each minute stretching into an eternity. Finally, Mark excused himself, leaving me alone with John and the echoes of what had happened. He retreated to our bedroom, closing the door behind him with finality, as if to seal the end of our life together. I sat on the couch, numb, trying to process the devastating consequences of my actions. The weight of John's quiet rage and his deliberate gestures, the flushed rings, the empty box, weighed on me like a heavy burden. As night fell, casting shadows across the room, I realized with a sinking feeling that John's calm exterior masked a storm of hurt and betrayal. The object in his hand had become a symbol of our broken trust and the unraveling of everything we had built together. "Why are you doing this?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. John's voice was steady but tinged with pain. His eyes, usually warm and comforting, now held a gleam of fear. "Because you brought another man into our marriage, into our home, and expected everything to stay the same." Tears welled up in my eyes as I struggled to find the right words. "I love you, John," I said, my voice breaking. "But I also love Mark. I thought we could do this together." John shook his head slowly, his disbelief palpable. "You can't have both of us," he said quietly, his words final. "You made your choice the moment you brought him into our home." Mark, sensing the tension, tentatively stepped forward. "Maybe we can talk about this," he suggested, his voice calm but uncertain. "We can find a solution that works for everyone." John's jaw clenched, his eyes narrowed with determination. "The only solution I see," he said firmly, his tone cutting through the air like a knife, "is for you both to leave." The finality of his words filled the room, leaving no room for argument or negotiation. I looked at Mark, silently begging him to say something, to offer a way to fix this. But Mark hesitated, clearly overwhelmed by the gravity of the situation. "John, please," Mark began, his voice shaking. "We care about you. We don't want—" "Don't pretend this is about caring," John snapped, his voice sharp. The room fell silent again, the tension building. I felt the weight of John's accusation, the guilt of my actions pressing down on me like a heavy burden. How had things gotten so out of control? "I never meant to hurt you," I whispered, my voice barely audible in the charged atmosphere. John's expression softened for a moment, a shadow of the love and warmth we had once shared flickering in his eyes. "But you did," he said softly, his voice full of sorrow. "You destroyed everything we had." I reached out to touch him, to erase the pain from his face, but he stepped back. His withdrawal was a physical manifestation of the emotional distance that now separated us. Mark shifted uneasily, unsure of his place in the unfolding drama. "John, maybe we should give each other some time," he suggested tentatively, his voice uncertain. John's gaze hardened, his resolve hardening. "Time won't change what you've done," he said firmly. "You both need to go, now." The finality of his words left no room for doubt. Mark looked at me, silently pleading for guidance, but I had none to give. The reality of our shattered marriage and the consequences of my choices hit me with brutal clarity. With heavy hearts, Mark and I gathered our things in silence, packing away the remnants of a life that had shattered beyond repair. John watched in silence, his eyes betraying a mixture of pain and resignation. As we walked out of the house, the weight of John's quiet anger and the devastation of our broken vows pressed down on me with every step. The night air was cool against my skin, a sharp contrast to the heat of the emotions swirling inside me. Behind us, the door closed with finality, echoing the end of our dreams together. I glanced back one last time, catching a glimpse of John standing in the doorway, his silhouette framed by the dim light of the hallway. In that moment, I knew that John's calm determination and quiet anger would haunt me for the rest of my life. The confrontation was over, but the consequences of my actions had only just begun to unfold. After we left John's house, Mark and I stayed together. But despite the physical distance, I couldn't shake the feeling that John wasn't finished with us. His calm demeanor was disturbingly composed, too accepting for the gravity of the situation. I knew him well enough to sense that underneath his calm exterior, John was plotting something. The days passed in a haze of uncertainty. I couldn't sleep or eat properly, haunted by the echoes of John's quiet anger and the shattered pieces of our marriage. Mark tried to calm me down by suggesting we move on, but I couldn't shake the feeling that John had a plan to turn the tables on us. Then, one night, a text came to my phone. It was from John, a simple, chilling message. "Come back home. We need to talk." Mark frowned when he saw it over my shoulder. "You can't be seriously considering this," he said, concern in his voice. I hesitated, torn between fear and curiosity. "I need to know what he's planning," I whispered. Mark shook his head, his frustration obvious. "He's not gonna forgive this easily," he warned. "It could be a trap." But the nagging uncertainty wouldn't leave me. Despite Mark's advice, I made up my mind. I needed answers, closure, in whatever form it came. The drive back to our house was nerve-wracking. Each mile felt like a step closer to an unknown fate. When I arrived, the house was quiet, bathed in the soft glow of dusk. I let myself in, my heart pounding in my chest. John was waiting in the living room, sitting on the couch with a bottle of wine in front of him. His eyes met mine as I entered, his expression unreadable. "You came?" he said, his voice calm, without the anger I had expected. I nodded, unable to speak. The air between us was thick with unspoken words, the weight of our broken relationship hanging in the room. John gestured to the couch across from him, a silent invitation to sit. I hesitated before lowering myself onto the seat, aware of the space between us. He poured 2 glasses of wine and handed one to me. I took it cautiously, unsure of his intentions. We sat in silence for a long moment, each sip of wine a small attempt to ease the tension. Finally, John spoke, his voice calm. "I've had time to think," he began, his eyes locked with mine. "About what happened, about us." I swallowed hard, not knowing what to expect. "John, He held up a hand, silencing me. "Listen," he said quietly. "I'm not here to rehash the past. What's done is done, but we must move forward." His words threw me. I had expected anger, accusations, but instead there was a calm determination in his tone. It unsettled me even more. "I've made a decision," John continued, his gaze unwavering. "I want a fresh start." I blinked, processing his words. "A fresh start?" I echoed, my voice barely above a whisper. John nodded, his expression grave. "Yes, but there are conditions." My heart raced, a mixture of anticipation and fear. "Conditions?" He leaned forward slightly, his eyes searching mine. "You and Mark leave town tonight, and you never come back." The demand hit me like a physical blow. "John, No," he interrupted, his tone firm. "This is not negotiable. You brought him into our lives, into our home. Now you both leave, and we'll pretend it never happened." I struggled for words, trying to comprehend the weight of his ultimatum. "What about us?" I finally managed, my voice shaking. John's gaze softened, a flicker of sadness crossing his face. "There is no us anymore," he said quietly. Not after this. Tears welled up in my eyes, a mixture of regret and grief overwhelming me. John, please. He shook his head, his resolve firm. It's too late for please, he said softly. You have made your choice. Now you must live with the consequences. Silence enveloped us again, the weight of his words settling over me like a heavy shroud. The wine sat untouched in my hand, its bitter taste lingering on my tongue. Minutes passed, tense and silent, before I nodded, a silent acceptance of the inevitable. I'll go, I whispered, my voice breaking. John nodded, his expression unreadable. Goodbye, he said softly, his eyes never leaving mine. I stood slowly, the room spinning as I walked out of our house for the last time. John's calm determination, his meticulously laid plan, had won. The pain in my heart and the weight of my decisions followed me into the night, leaving a trail of shattered dreams and unanswered questions. As I drove away, leaving John's house behind, a cold sense of foreboding settled over me. His unnerving calm had left an indelible mark that foreshadowed the tumultuous weeks ahead. The days blurred together in a haze of uncertainty and anxiety. John wasted no time in filing for divorce. His actions were swift and methodical. The legal documents arrived like the nails of death, each page a stark reminder of the life I had destroyed. He's asking for full custody, my lawyer told me grimly. He's citing your affair as grounds for instability. The words hit me like a punch in the gut. Full custody. The nightmare I had feared was taking shape before my eyes. I had always believed I was a good mother, but now my actions threatened to strip me of everything I held dear. Mark, once my port in the storm, began to withdraw under the weight of our crumbling relationship and mounting legal pressure. His calls became less frequent, his visits sporadic. I was overwhelmed with guilt, knowing that I had dragged him into my betrayal. I can't do this, Mark confessed one night, his voice strained with emotion. I thought we could make it work, but everything is falling apart. Tears streamed down my face as I listened, knowing deep down that he was right. Our foundation had been built on deceit and betrayal, a shaky ground that couldn't support us any longer. Days turned into weeks, and the legal battle intensified. John's lawyers presented evidence of my affair and painted a damning picture of my character. Testimony, text messages, photos, everything was laid bare for the court to examine. I sat in the courtroom with a sinking feeling, watching my life unravel before the judge's eyes. John, calm and determined, presented himself as a stable, devoted parent, in stark contrast to the image of instability painted of me. He deserves full custody, the judge declared, her words a hammer blow to my hopes. Miss Smith, your actions have shown a disregard for the welfare of your children, she continued. I felt numb as the reality sank in. John was granted full custody. My children, the center of my world, slipping away from me because of decisions I could never take back. Outside the courtroom, John approached me with a cold determination in his eyes. You brought this on yourself, he said quietly. I warned you there would be consequences. Tears welled up in my eyes as a wave of remorse and helplessness washed over me. John, please, I begged, searching for words that might undo the damage, but he turned away without so much as a glance, leaving me to face the wreckage of my life alone. The weeks that followed were a blur of heartbreak and loss. I moved out of our home, lost custody, and was left with only supervised visitation. Every moment with my children felt like a cruel reminder of what I had lost. Their confused looks haunted me as they struggled to understand why Mommy couldn't be with them all the time. Mark, burdened with guilt, eventually withdrew completely. I can't do this anymore, he confessed in our last conversation. I'm sorry, but I have to move on. His departure left me completely alone to face the consequences of my actions in a world that had turned against me. Friends and family, once pillars of support, distanced themselves, unable to reconcile the person I had become with the one they once knew. As the months passed, I watched from afar as John rebuilt his life, a life that no longer included me. He moved into a new home filled with memories that I was no longer a part of. Pictures on social media painted a portrait of happiness and stability, a stark contrast to the chaos that consumed my every moment. Behind John's calm, collected exterior was a ruthless determination to exact his revenge, and he had succeeded. I had lost everything: my marriage, my children, my dignity, all because of a betrayal that had spiraled out of control. In the solitude of my new reality, I faced the painful truth. I had brought this nightmare upon myself. My selfish, reckless choices had led me down a path of destruction from which there would be no return. As I stared at the empty rooms of my new apartment, haunted by memories of a life I once had, I knew the truth. John's quiet determination had sealed my fate. The nightmare I was now living was a consequence of my betrayal, a punishment I would never escape,